Bruchim Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Nun Tes Amud Beis at the very top. We learned until now that a korban Tomid Shel Bein Ha'arboim is the last korban to be brought, with the exception of a korban Pesach. A korban Pesach could be brought after the korban Tomid Shel Bein Ha'arboim. However, we saw other exceptions, and Rabbi Shmuel ben Noshel, Rabbi Yossi HaGlili taught us that one of those exceptions are that if a person is a mechusar kippurim, meaning to say he's, let's say, a metzara, and he has to bring a korban in order to then complete his tahara process, in order to then be able to then eat kachim. And this person, before the korban Tomid Shel Bein Ha'arboim was brought, he then brought a korban nedava of a shlomim. Now, for him to then fulfill the mitzvah aseh of eating that shlomim at night, he has to be tahar. Now, he forgot to bring his own korban before the korban Tomid Shel Bein Ha'arboim. Says Rabbi Yossi HaGlili, Rabbi Shmuel ben Noshel, Rabbi Yossi HaGlili, that he can go ahead and bring his korban after the korban Tomid Shel Bein Ha'arboim, which will then give him a complete tahara and allow him to eat from that shlomim at night. The Gemara then asks, how could that mitzvah of eating the korban shlomim at night, the mitzvah aseh, be doiche the mitzvah aseh of hashlama, of not then having any other korbanos after a korban Tomid Shel Bein Ha'arboim? To which Rav Papa answered that when he then brings that korban, he will bring it on top and put it on top of the mizbeach, on the rosh of the mizbeach, whereby he's not going to burn it until the next morning, and therefore that's going to be permissible. The Gemara now asks, Omar le Rav Shaman bar Abba le Rav Papa. He asked on Rav Papa's understanding, Lidi doch, according to you, the Amris Maila Umelina Berosh Shel Mizbeach, you're allowed to bring up the korban and leave it there on the Rosh HaMizbeach. In other words, and then burn it the next morning. So it's not going to be that you're doiche the mitzvah aseh of hashlama, of making sure that there's no other korban brought after the korban Tomid Shel Bein Ha'arboim. Kaimin va'avdinon milsa lekahanim da'asu b'leitakola. If you're going to then do that, you're going to then bring a situation that will cause kohanim to have a takola. In other words, you cause them to then make an error. The savri, because they'll think the yoimei hu va'asu lakturi. They'll think when they see those parts of the korban on the rosh hamizbeach, together with the other parts on the mizbeach that are being burnt, they might come to then burn that as well, and therefore it'll be a mistake. It'll be an iser. So how can you allow them to do that by putting on the Rosh HaMizbeach? Answers Rav Papa Amar Lei, Kohanim Zerizin Hein. Kohanim are indeed Zrizin, and therefore it's not a concern. Omar Le Rav Ashi Le Rav Kahano. Va'amrei La Rav Huna Bereid Rav Nosen Le Rav Papa. V'hokama de lo miskatre emurin. Behold, he says, so long as they're not going to then burn then the emurin, then there's a problem. Kohanim lo matzi ochel basar. The kohanim are not going to be able to eat the basar. So, in order for the kohanim to eat the basar, the meat, the emurim have to be burnt. And only after the kohanim will be able to eat the meat will there be a kapara for the bailim. So then, if this is going to be the scenario, they're going to put the Eivarim on the Rosh HaMizbeach, granted that the Kohanim are Zrizinheim and they will not burn it. But Hai Gufa, if they're not going to burn it, then how is it not going to be a problem? Because after all, there won't be a kapara. If they're not going to be a kapara, then the Bailim, he then will not be able to eat his kachim at night because he's still Mechusar Kippurim. He never got a kapara. The Tanya, the Gemara explains as follows: Yochel, I might think you kohanim roshoim bechazei v'shoik koidim haktaras emurim. I might think that the kohanim could eat their parts of chazei v'shoik, even when the emurim have not been burned. Talmud Loima, the Brisa goes on to teach us, V'hiktir hakoyin es hachelev, hamizbecha, v'hodar v'hayachez chazei la'aron u'labonov. Because it states in this order of the pasuk, it says that the kohen will burn the chelev on the mizbech, and then it says afterwards that he will then get the chazei, the parts that he will then be able to then eat. It must be that you burn the emurim before you give the kohanim the chazei v'shoik. V'kamed the kohanim lo achle bose bailin lo miskapri. And so long as the kohanim do not eat their parts, then the bailin don't get a kaporo, as it says as follows. The Tanya, for the Brisa teaches us, ve'achlu oisam asher kupar bahem. What does that mean? They'll eat that which is going to be ultimately an atonement. This comes to teach us that the kohanim will eat, and the bailim will then get their kapara. So over here we're left with a question again: how could it be that you're not going to then burn the emurim, even if the kohanim are going to be careful? They're not going to burn those emurim because it's on the Rosh HaMizbech. They'll be told by the kohen that puts on the Rosh HaMizbech that it's not to be burnt until the next morning, because it was brought after the korban tamishel ben ha'arboim. But if they're not going to burn it, then the kohen cannot eat their parts. And if the kohen do not eat the parts, and when they don't eat the meat, then the bailim will not get a kapora. So again, this person who is mechusar p'kippurim will not have a kapora. Omar lei. He answered him, Kivan deloy efshar asum. Since he's not able to burn those parts on the Mizbech because it was a korban that was brought after the korban tamishel ben ha'arboim, then it's as if it's like a korban that was nevad or nifsal, whereby the din is, or nitma rather, where the din is that the kohen can still, eat their meat, whereby it will bring a kapara for the bailim. The time, like it says in the following brisa, Yochol, I might think, nitmu'u amurin, oishe avdu lo yukahanim zakoim bechaze v'shoik. I might think that those parts that have to be, those emurim that have to be burnt, if they get neva, they get lost, or they become tamei, the kohen could not eat the meat. Talmud loymar v'hoya hachazei la'aron u'lebonav mikol mokom. Since it says that Aaron HaKohen and his children will have the chazei, we learn mikol mokom in all circumstances, even in the case where it is nevad or nitma. So too over here, the chacham considered as if it has the same status, since it cannot be burnt, then the kohen can still eat the meat, whereby the bailim will get his kaporo. Says the Gemara, Rav Kahana Rami Ksiv. The Gemara now says that Rav Kahana, he then brought a psukim that seemed to be a contradiction to this Yesoid, as follows. Lo yalin chelev chagi ad boiker. It states in the pasuk that the fats of my chagi, of my korban, cannot stay overnight until the morning. From here we learn out, the Gemara says, ad boiker hu lo yalin, ha kolayla kula yalin. Only until the morning it cannot stay overnight. But all night it could stay over, so long as you burn it before alos hashachar. V'ksiv, and yet it says, v'hiktir aleh chel ve'hashlomim. The other pasuk states, however, that you will burn upon it the chel ve'hashlomim. That's what we learned before. Aleha hashlem kol ha'karbonos kulam. We learn from there that since the korban tamid shel shachar, it states over here that you shall then burn the fats of the shlomim upon the korban tamid shel shachar in the morning. That means you can bring other korbanos afterwards. Haleh hashlem kol ha'karbonos kulam. You're to bring all the other korbanos after tamid shel shachar. From there we learned out, but when it comes to tamid shel ben ha'arboim, there's nothing to be brought afterwards. You're not allowed to bring afterwards. So if that's the case, how can it say over here in the first pasuk that we just quoted that all night long you could bring the fats and burn it, so long as you burn it before the morning, which implies you can go ahead and bring a korban even after the korban tamid shel ben ha'arboim. Answers the Gemara, Hu moisiv lo v'hu mefarek lo. He asked the question and he answered his own question. Kishe nithoisru. We're talking about when it was left over. Meaning to say, what is it? Nithoisru mean that the dam was brought before, the Zrikas Hadam was brought before the Tamid Shel Ben Harbayim. Then, in such a case, you could go ahead and, yes, burn the fat at night. It's only when the Damim was not then brought before the Korban Tamid Shel Ben Harbayim. If it was brought afterwards, then it's usher to go ahead and burn that Korban until the next day. But this post that we're talking about over here is talking about where it was, yes, brought in terms of the Avodas Hadam, was brought before the Korban Tamid Shel Ben Harboim. That's why when it says Lo Yolin Chelev Chagi Ad Boiker, it means only Ad Boiker who did Lo Yolin. Hakol Alayla Kula Yolin, you can go ahead and burn it at night. Rami Le Rav Safra Le Rav. Rav Safra asked the following contradiction onto Rav. To Rav. Kisiv, it says in the pasuk Lo Yolin La Boiker Zevach Chag Pesach. The Zevach Chag Pesach cannot be left overnight until the morning. La Boiker Hu De Lo Yolin Hakol Alayla Yolin. In the morning, you cannot go ahead and leave it over. However, when you can medayik the entire night, you could leave it over. The Haksiv, and it says in the pasuk Oila Shabbos B'Shabbatoi. The Korban Oila that is brought on Shabbos is for each Shabbos, when it was brought on that Shabbos. And you can't bring a Korban Oila from the weekday for Shabbos or for Yom Tiv. Now we have a contradiction because the first post that we just quoted of Lo Yolin La Boiker Zevach Chag Pesach. Now the Chag Pesach, the dam was sprinkled in the afternoon. And when is it going to be brought? It's going to be brought then, according to this, at night, so long as it doesn't reach the morning. So that implies that you can go ahead and have the sprinkling of the dam during the day and the burning of the carbon at night. Yet, it says in the other pasuk, Oila Shabbos b'Shabbatoi. Only a carbon oila on that Shabbos can be brought then on that Shabbos. But if it was something that was brought during the week, it can't be then burnt on Shabbos. If it was brought during the week, it can't be burnt on Yom Tiv. Over here, we're saying you could, yes, bring the dam on Yudalid, which is when the Korban Pesach was sprinkled, and then it says you can go ahead and you can go ahead and burn it at night. Omalei, says the Gemara, Kvar Ramya Nihile Rav Achabar Chaya LeRabbi Abahu. He already asked this question to Rabbi Abahu, to Rabbi Abahu. Vishani lei, and he answered him, Hacha be'arba sar shechalios b'Shabbos askinan. He made no kimta, and he said this pasuk is talking about when Yudalid Nisan Erev Pesach, when the Korban Pesach is brought, was on Shabbos. So therefore, it comes out that the dam that was sprinkled on Shabbos, whereby Motzei Shabbos, which is Yom Tiv, that was when it was brought. In other words, it's not going to be a problem. It's not going to be a problem of Chol to Yom Tiv. It's going to be from Shabbos to Yom Tiv. The Chalvei Shabbos Karivin b'Yom Tiv. The chaylev, the fats on the Shabbos can be brought for Yom Tiv. Omarle. So he says to him, Mishum dechal ve'Shabbos krivim b'Yom Tiv ana niku v'neimolei dehaikro ba'arbosa shechal yos b'Shabbos hu dichsiv. Because of this scenario, we're going to have to say that that's what the pasuk means. Gemara says, Omarle shavke likro dehu dochik umukim anafshe and hochanami. In order to explain out the pasuk, so it's not going to be a contradiction to the pasuk we said before that oila Shabbos b'Shabbatoi. Then in Achanam we have to explain it in this way that indeed the Yudalid that the pasuk is talking about came out to be on Shabbos, whereby again the chaylev that was brought on Shabbos will be nikrav on Yom Tiv.